The hospital doors slid shut behind Emily Parker, and the cold night air brushed her face as she stepped into the quiet parking lot. Her body felt heavy, each muscle aching with a deep, weary thrum. Her mind was a numb haze, a fog left behind by 14 hours of caring for others. 14 hours straight. No breaks, no rest, just a constant stream of faces, voices, pain, and the endless piercing alarms that became the soundtrack to her life. She walked slowly toward her old silver car, her feet dragging on the asphalt. The lot was nearly empty, a few scattered vehicles under the lonely flickering lights. The night felt too quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just left behind. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out her keys, the familiar metal cold against her skin. She slid behind the wheel, the worn seat sighing under her weight. For a moment, she closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. Then, she turned the key. Nothing. She tried again. The engine coughed once, a pathetic, sputtering sound, and then fell silent. A cold knot tightened in her chest. Not tonight. Please, not tonight. Leaning forward, she rested her forehead on the steering wheel, the cool plastic doing little to soothe her frazzled nerves. Her hands trembled. She had another shift in the morning, a brutally early one. She had no energy left, no strength to deal with this. Pulling out her phone, she checked for roadside assistance. The wait time was hours. Hours she simply did not have. The parking lot suddenly felt colder, lonelier. She looked around the vast, empty space. Almost no cars, no people. A profound sense of isolation began to creep in, but then, she noticed it. Across the street, a small auto shop stood against the darkness. Dim lights spilled from its windows, and an open sign, barely glowing, flickered like a weak pulse. A tiny spark of hope ignited within her. Grabbing her bag, she stepped out of the car and crossed the street, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Inside the shop, the air was thick with the scent of oil and metal. Tools lay scattered across workbenches, and a lone broom rested against a wall, a silent witness to a long day's work. Only one person was there. A man, with dark hair and grease smudged on his hands, looked up, surprised to see her. His eyes looked as tired as she felt. "Sorry," she said softly, her voice raspy. Are you still open?" He hesitated for a moment, looking from her to the clock on the wall. Then, he gave a slow nod. "I was just about to close." Relief washed through her, so potent it almost made her dizzy. "My car," she explained, the words tumbling out. "It won't start. I just got off my shift at the hospital." He studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in the exhausted lines on her face, the simple blue scrubs, and the unspoken weight she carried on her shoulders. "All right," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Show me." Back outside, the night felt even colder. He popped the hood of her car and shined a bright flashlight inside, the beam cutting through the darkness. His expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "It's not good," he said, his voice low. "But it's not impossible." She watched silently as he worked, his movements calm, focused, and careful. He was methodical, tracing wires, checking connections, his expertise evident in every small action. "Can it be fixed?" she finally asked, the question hanging in the air. "Yes," he replied, not looking up. "But it's going to take some time." Her shoulders slumped. "I have to be back at work in just a few hours." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, really looked at her this time. He saw the bone-deep exhaustion, the quiet desperation. He closed the hood with a soft click. "I'll take care of it tonight." She stared at him, bewildered. "You don't have to do that, I know," he said simply. "But I will." Together, they pushed the car across the quiet street and into the garage. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed to life, casting a stark glow on the scene. Tools clinked softly as he began to work in earnest. Emily sat on a cold metal chair, too tired to speak, too grateful to move. He worked quietly, wiping grease from his hands, turning stubborn bolts, and checking wires with a practiced touch. After a long stretch of comfortable silence, she asked, "Why are you helping me?" He paused, a wrench in his hand, and turned to face her. "Because you look like someone who spends all her time helping everyone else." His words hit her harder than she expected. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Some days are heavy." He nodded, a look of understanding in his tired eyes. "I can tell." Hours passed. Between the sounds of repairs, they talked. They talked about work, about life, about the dreams they barely dared to speak aloud anymore. She learned his name was Jake. She learned he'd lost his corporate job months ago and that this small, struggling shop was all he had left. He learned she was working double shifts to help her younger brother through school, and that she never, ever complained. Somewhere between the hum of machinery and their quiet words, something shifted. The garage, which had at first felt cold and industrial, now felt like a sanctuary. At nearly 3 in the morning, a new sound filled the space. The engine of her car roared to life, strong and steady. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You did it." A tired but proud smile touched Jake's lips. "It was close," he admitted, "but she run now." Emily stepped closer, looking at the purring engine as if it were a miracle. "Thank you," she whispered, the words filled with more emotion than she could express. When she reached for her wallet, he put a hand up to stop her. "No," he said firmly. "But you can't just." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Just get home and get some rest. Be safe." A wave of emotion swelled in her chest. She hadn't expected kindness. Not like this. Not tonight. Before she could think, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward and hugged him. It was a quiet hug, but it was full of all the gratitude and relief she couldn't put into words. He froze for a second, surprised, then gently hugged her back. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale with the first hints of dawn. She drove home, exhausted, but feeling lighter than she had in months. And he stood in the doorway of his small shop, watching her taillights disappear, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. She didn't know it yet, and neither did he. But this night, this broken-down car, this quiet, unexpected act of kindness was about to change everything. Their lives had just intersected in the most unlikely of ways, and neither of them would ever be the same again. Morning came too fast. Emily woke before her alarm, her body still tired, but her mind was wide awake. The night before replayed in her thoughts. The quiet garage, the soft light, the way Jake had looked at her, like she mattered. She sat up in bed, placed her feet on the cool floor, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled before her day had even begun. At the hospital, her coworkers noticed it immediately. "You look different," one of them said, "more awake, more alive." Emily only smiled. She didn't know how to explain it, how one small act of kindness could lift such a heavy weight from her shoulders. Throughout her shift, she found herself working with more patience, more warmth. Even when the day grew hardened, it was hard. With a long surgery, a crying child, and a worried mother, something inside her had shifted. She felt grounded, supported, as if someone out there cared whether she made it through the day. When her shift ended, she hesitated before heading home. Instead, she stopped at a small bakery and bought muffins, still warm and soft. She didn't think too much about it. She just followed the feeling in her chest. The garage looked the same, quiet, a little worn, but when she stepped inside, Jake looked up. For a moment, he seemed surprised. Then something like relief crossed his face. "Hey," he said, "you made it." She held out the bag. "For you." He blinked, then laughed softly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she replied. They sat together near the open garage door, warm air drifting in. The smell of oil and sugar mixed strangely, but comfortably. They talked again, about small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, dreams they had buried. Emily learned he once wanted to build something of his own, a place people could trust, a place that felt honest. Jake learned she had always wanted to help people, even when it cost her sleep, even when it broke her heart. Time moved quietly around them. When she left that day, they both felt it, something forming, something neither could name. Over the next week, she returned again. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to sit. Jake never asked why. He never made it awkward. He simply accepted her presence, and she did the same. They fell into a comfortable, easy rhythm. One evening, she arrived looking drained, her shoulders low, her eyes tired. "Rough day?" he asked. She nodded. He handed her a bottle of water and sat beside her, saying nothing. Minutes passed, and then her voice broke. "We lost a patient today." He didn't speak, didn't rush, didn't offer empty comfort. He just stayed, and that was enough. She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. He shook his head. Nothing to be sorry for. That was the moment she realized something. She trusted him. Not because of what he did, but because of how he stayed. Days turned into evenings, evenings into a routine. People in the neighborhood noticed. They teased him, smiled when she walked in. He pretended not to care, but secretly, he did. One afternoon, she arrived to find him staring at a stack of papers, his jaw tight, his hands shaking slightly. She asked what was wrong. He tried to hide it, but she already knew. Bills, late notices, repairs he couldn't afford. "You should have told me," she said gently. "I didn't want to burden you." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not a burden." The words hit him hard. He had spent so long carrying everything alone, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. That night, she went home and thought. She thought about everything he had done, about how quietly he cared, about how unfair life had been to him, and she made a decision. The next day, she spoke to her coworkers, 2 friends, 2 people who trusted her. She told them about the mechanic who stayed up all night so she could make it to work. They listened, and they cared. By the end of the week, she had something planned. When she walked into the garage that evening, she carried an envelope. He frowned. "What's that?" "Just open it." Inside were donations, notes, messages of thanks. He stared at it, stunned. "You did this?" She nodded. "You helped me when you didn't have to. This is just a little of that kindness coming back." He sat down slowly, emotion catching in his throat. No one had ever done that for him. He looked at her, his eyes wet, his voice low. "Thank you." She smiled. "You're not alone anymore." That night, they stood outside the garage, the sky fading into a soft blue. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "I don't know what this is." She answered quietly, "Neither do I, but it feels real." He nodded. "It does." They stood there, close, not touching, but closer than before. Something was changing. And deep down, they both knew this was only the beginning. Have you ever had one of those days where everything just goes wrong? Picture this: a nurse, just finished with a grueling hospital shift, totally exhausted, barely able to stand. She gets to her car in the empty, cold parking lot, turns the key, and nothing. The car is dead, no one's around to help. It feels like the universe is just piling on. But then, she spots a tiny light in the distance. A small garage, still open. Inside, a mechanic, just as tired as she is, ready to close up for the night. But he sees her, and he stays. He works through the night, fixing her car. When he's done, he won't take a dime. She comes back the next day, not for her car, but just to say thank you. And that thank you turned into a conversation, then another, and another. Sometimes, life has to break down to bring the right people together, don't you think? The days after the envelope felt different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just heavier in a quiet, unspoken way. Emily noticed it first. Every time she walked into the garage, her heart would beat a little faster. Her steps would slow down, as if she wanted the moment to last just a little bit longer. Jake noticed it too. He saw the way she lingered before leaving, the way her eyes searched for his when she arrived. The silences between them no longer felt empty. They were full of things unsaid. They were careful. Almost too careful. Neither of them wanted to be the one to say something first, to risk changing what felt safe and familiar. But feelings, as they often do, don't stay quiet forever. One evening, Emily arrived at the garage later than usual. The sky was already dark, and her shoulders were tense from a long day. Jake looked up from under the hood of a car. "Long day?" he asked. She just nodded. "Hard one." He wiped his hands on a rag and came to sit beside her. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry, he just waited. After a long moment, she finally spoke. "I almost quit today." His head turned toward her. "Why?" She stared at the floor, her voice barely a whisper. "It gets so heavy, watching people suffer, holding families together, pretending I'm strong when I just feel empty." Her voice trembled. "Sometimes I wonder if I can even keep doing this." Jake listened to every word. When she finished, he spoke slowly, his voice calm and steady. "You're stronger than you think. But even strong people need to rest." A small, soft laugh escaped her lips. "You always say the right thing." He shook his head. "I just say what feels true." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And in that moment, something in her expression changed. A softness, a realization, a flicker of something new. He felt it too. The air in the garage shifted, growing thick with unspoken emotions. They sat so close, their arms were almost touching. Neither moved. That night, as she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Jake, yeah, thank you for being here always." The word slipped out before he could stop it. She smiled, a real smile this time, and left. He stood there long after she was gone, his heart racing. Over the next few days, things grew more intense. Not outwardly, but inside. They laughed more, they talked longer, they looked at each other differently. The town started to notice. Customers would smile knowingly, and neighbors would tease them gently. Jake tried to ignore it, tried to stay focused on his work. But late at night, alone in the quiet of the garage, he thought about her. He thought about the way she listened, the way she cared, the way she somehow made the world feel lighter. And that scared him, because caring meant risking loss, and he wasn't sure he could handle that again. One afternoon, Emily arrived, looking shaken. Her hands trembled, and her eyes were red. Jake saw it immediately. "What happened?" She hesitated. Then the words tumbled out. "My brother called. He might have to drop out of school. There are money issues." Her voice cracked. "I feel like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough." Jake stood up and walked toward her. "You've done more than enough." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm so tired of being strong." Her words seemed to break something in him. Without thinking, he reached out and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, just slightly. And in that moment, everything they had been holding back surfaced. The silence, the closeness, the shared pain. They were standing inches apart, breathing the same air. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest, his thoughts racing. He wanted to say something, anything, but he was afraid of ruining it, afraid of losing her, so he stayed quiet. Emily was the one who stepped back first. "I should go," she said softly. He could only nod. "Okay." She left quickly, almost too quickly. As the door closed, Jake felt the heavy weight of everything he had and said. That night, neither of them slept well. Emily lay in bed, replaying the moment over and over, wondering why he didn't say anything, wondering if she had imagined the tension between them. Jake sat alone in the dark, regretting his silence, terrified he had already lost her. The next day, she didn't come by the garage. The day after that, still nothing. The garage felt emptier than ever, quieter. Jake tried to focus on his work, but his hands shook and his mind wandered. By the third day, he couldn't take it anymore. He closed the shop early and drove to the hospital. He waited outside, nervous and unsure of what he would even say. When Emily finally stepped out, she looked surprised to see him. "Jake, we need to talk," he said, his voice more firm than he felt. She nodded slowly. They walked to a quiet spot nearby, the air heavy between them. "I didn't come by because I was confused," she admitted, breaking the silence. "About what?" "About us." He swallowed hard. "Me too." Another silence fell, but this time it felt different. Finally, he spoke. "I care about you, Emily, more than I probably should. I didn't want to scare you away." Her eyes softened. "You didn't scare me, you scared yourself." He looked at her, and the truth came pouring out, his voice shaking slightly. I think I've been falling for you. Since the night your car broke down." A smile broke through her tears. "I think I've been falling too." The words hung in the air. Simple, honest, no drama, no rush. Just the truth. They stood there, two tired souls finally saying what they truly felt. Jake took a slow breath. "I don't know where this goes, but I want to try." Emily nodded, her eyes shining. "So do I." That moment didn't come with fireworks or grand gestures, but it changed everything. Because now, they were no longer pretending, and what lay ahead would test them in ways neither of them could have ever expected. The days after their confession felt almost dreamlike. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just soft, careful, and filled with a quiet, unspoken understanding. Emily and Jake didn't rush anything. They didn't try to define what they were becoming. They simply allowed their connection to exist, to breathe, and in that space, it felt more real than anything either of them had known before. They fell into a natural rhythm, meeting after work. Sometimes it was for a quick coffee. Other times just to sit in comfortable silence in his garage. The scent of oil and metal, a strange but comforting backdrop to their budding story. They were learning each other, not through grand gestures, but through small, intimate observations. In turn, Jake learned when Emily's quietness was a sign she needed comfort, a listening ear, or just the reassurance of his presence. But life, as it often does, rarely allows peace to linger for too long. One evening, Emily arrived at the garage, her usual gentle smile replaced with something strained, something forced. Jake saw it instantly, his hands pausing over an engine block. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Then, she finally spoke. "The hospital, they offered me a position. Out of town." He kept his voice steady, where she looked at the floor, 3 hours away. "That's good, Em. That's really good. You deserve that." Her eyes lifted to meet his, searching his face for something, anything. "It means leaving," she said, the words hanging between them like a physical weight. "You should take it." She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. "I don't want to leave you." It was the first time she had said it so plainly, so vulnerably. The admission, raw and honest, cracked something open in the space they had so carefully built. He had to look away, unable to meet her gaze. "I would never ask you to stay." "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But it still hurts." Silence filled the garage, louder than any engine. They both knew what this was. Dreams pulling them in opposite directions. Life, with its cruel timing, asking them to make choices that felt far too big, far too soon. That night, their goodbye was quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional storm brewing inside them. There were no promises for the future, no grand plans to bridge the distance. There was just a long, searching look, a silent communication that spoke volumes, and a gentle, fleeting touch of hands that felt both like a hello and a goodbye. The days that followed were heavier, each one a little harder than the last. Emily tried to lose herself in her work at the hospital, but her mind constantly drifted back to the garage, to Jake. Jake, in turn, worked longer hours, burying himself in grease and gears, anything to keep his mind from dwelling on the empty space she had left behind. They texted, but the messages became less frequent, shorter, the words more careful, as if they were both afraid of saying too much or too little. The distance wasn't just physical anymore. It was an emotional chasm, slowly, quietly, growing between them. Then, one night, everything changed. Emily had just finished a grueling late shift, her body aching with fatigue. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Jake's name on the screen. A flicker of hope, immediately extinguished by the tone of his voice when she answered. It was different. Tight, strained, "Emily." "The shop." He paused, struggling for breath. "There was a fire." Her heart dropped. "What, are you okay?" "An electrical issue," he managed to say. It spread fast. The damage is it's bad. Without a second thought, without even changing out of her scrubs, she grabbed her keys. I'm coming. She drove through the dead of night, her heart racing, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The 3-hour drive felt like an eternity, every mile amplifying her fear. When she finally arrived, the scene was devastating. The garage stood dark and skeletal against the pre-dawn sky, the acrid smell of smoke hanging heavy in the air. She ran to him, her feet crunching on unseen debris. Are you okay? He looked up, his face smudged with soot, his eyes hollow. He nodded slowly. I'm fine. The shop's not. She didn't say a word. She just sat down beside him on the cold concrete and pulled him into her arms, holding him as he slumped against her. No, she said, her voice firm. You didn't. I'm right here. And for the first time since she had met him, the stoic, self-reliant mechanic cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet, shuddering sobs of exhaustion, of fear, and of profound loss. She stayed with him, a silent anchor in his storm, all through the night. When the first light of morning crept over the horizon, casting a gray, unforgiving light on the wreckage, the truth was starkly clear. The shop wouldn't be reopening anytime soon. Maybe not at all. The place that was his life, his sanctuary, was gone. Jake looked broken, lost. I don't know what to do. Emily looked at the ruins, then back at him, a fierce certainty hardening her features. Come with me, she said. He stared at her, confused. What? Come with me, she repeated, her voice stronger now. To the new city. We'll figure it out. Together. He shook his head, a flicker of his old pride returning. Emily, you can't. You can't give up your future for me. She took his hands, her grip firm, unwavering. I'm not giving anything up. I'm choosing you. The words stunned him into silence. She continued, the confession she'd been holding back finally spilling out. I was afraid to say it before, afraid of what it meant. But I'm not afraid now. I love you. The world seemed to stop. The smell of smoke, the chill of the morning air, the devastation around them had all faded away. And then, a whisper from Jake, raw and full of a love that had survived distance and disaster. I love you too. That was it. The moment everything shifted, when a new path was forged from the ashes of the old one. They packed what little he had left, which wasn't much. They left the town, the memories, and the wreckage behind. It wasn't an easy choice, and it wasn't an easy road ahead. But they were facing it together, and that made them stronger than anything life could throw at them. The new city was hard. They moved into a small apartment, a far cry from what either of them was used to. The days were long, filled with new routines and unfamiliar challenges. Jake, ever resilient, found work at another repair shop, humbling himself to start over from scratch, learning someone else's system. Emily thrived in her new position at the hospital, but she worked harder than ever, trying to prove herself. Some nights they were so exhausted they could barely speak. Some days, the stress boiled over into arguments, but they never gave up. They talked, they listened, they apologized. They held each other when things felt overwhelming. They had learned a fundamental truth in the fire. Love wasn't about perfect timing or easy paths. It was about showing up. It was about holding on, even when things burned to the ground. Even when the future felt completely uncertain. Months later, they stood together in the late afternoon sun. In front of them was a small rented garage, modest but clean. A brand new sign hung above the door. Jake's Auto Repair. Emily smiled, a genuine radiant smile. You did it. He squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with pride and gratitude. We did it, he replied. They held hands, standing there in the sunlight, a quiet testament to their journey. They knew that every hard moment, every setback, every tear, had led them right here, to this place. And somewhere deep inside, in that quiet space where their hearts met, they both knew, that broken down car, on a cold night, that one small act of kindness, had sparked a fire of its own, one that didn't destroy, but built a life neither of them could have ever expected. The first few months in the new city were tough, to say the least. The apartment they found was tiny, with walls so thin you could hear your neighbor's thoughts. The nights were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was an unfamiliar, unsettling silence. Emily worked long, grueling shifts at the hospital. She was constantly learning new systems, meeting new faces. But she brought the same unwavering compassion to her work that she always had. Jake, on the other hand, had to start from the very bottom again. His days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. His hands were perpetually sore, his back ached, and some days he'd come home completely exhausted, covered in grease, and filled with a gnawing. There were nights Emily would come home silent, her mind heavy with the weight of patients she couldn't save. It was a heavy burden for them both, but they never had to face it alone. That was their secret weapon. They'd cook simple meals together, sitting on the floor because they didn't have any furniture yet. They would laugh about how little they owned, how absurd their situation was. And somehow, that shared laughter made everything feel richer, fuller. Slowly but surely, things began to change. Word started to spread about Jake. People talked about the new mechanic, how honest he was, how he never overcharged, and how he treated everyone, regardless of what they were driving, with genuine respect. Soon, customers who had come once were returning, and they were bringing their friends with them. One afternoon, the shop owner, a gruff older man named Sal, pulled Jake aside. He looked Jake up and down, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Kid," he said, "you've got something special. You're not just fixing cars, you're helping people. If you ever think about running your own place, you let me know." Jake came home that night with tears in his eyes. He recounted the conversation to Emily, his voice thick with emotion. She just listened, a slow smile spreading across her face. She held his face in her hands, her touch gentle and firm. "I told you," she said softly, "you were always meant for more than just turning wrenches. You were meant to build something." Weeks turned into months. Life began to find a rhythm, a steady beat. The sharp edges of their new reality started to soften. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake asked Emily to go for a walk with him. They strolled through the familiar streets, past the small cluttered garage where he'd been working so hard. Then, he stopped in front of an empty building. The windows were dusty, and the old, faded sign swung creakily in the breeze. He took a deep, shaky breath, the kind you take before a big leap. "I've been saving," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been planning, and hoping." He turned to face her, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. "I want to open my own shop again, but this time, I don't want to do it alone." Emily's eyes widened. "Jake, are you serious?" He nodded, a determined look settling on his face. "I want to build something with you, Emily, a future, a life." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the image of the man she loved standing before her. A single word escaped her lips, a breath of sound filled with all the hope and love in her heart. Yes. That night, they sat on the curb outside the dusty, forgotten building, dreaming out loud. They talked about the shop, about a home, about a life that finally felt safe and truly theirs. Months later, a new, simple sign went up: Jake's Auto Repair. On opening day, Emily stood right beside him, pride glowing in her eyes like a beacon. The shop filled slowly at first, a customer here, a customer there. Then, it became a steady stream. People came for the quality of the work, but they stayed because of the heart behind it. They stayed for the honest advice, the fair prices, and the feeling that they were more than just a transaction. Through it all, Jake and Emily grew stronger. It wasn't always easy. They argued sometimes, they struggled with the stress of a new business, they learned hard lessons. But they never, ever walked away from each other. One quiet evening, long after the last customer had gone home, Jake locked the shop door for the night. He turned to Emily, who was watching him with a soft smile. The sky behind them was a masterpiece of gold and pink. He reached into his pocket, and she noticed immediately that his hands were shaking. "Jake?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. He just smiled. A nervous, beautiful smile. "Emily," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "The night your car broke down, stranded on that dark road, I thought my life was ending. I thought I'd lost everything." He paused, taking another shaky breath. But it wasn't ending. It was just beginning. In one smooth motion, he dropped to one knee. He held up a small, simple ring that caught the last light of the setting sun. "Emily Parker," he said, his voice full of a love so deep it felt like it could move mountains. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face, but these were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," she choked out through a laugh. "Of course, yes." He scrambled to his feet, pulling her into his arms, spinning her around. They laughed, they cried, and they held each other as if the entire world had finally, perfectly, aligned just for them. Months later, they stood under soft, twinkling lights, surrounded by their friends, their family, and the community of people whose lives they had touched. There was no grand hall, no extravagant luxury. There was just love, pure and simple. As Emily walked toward Jake, she had a flash of memory, that cold, rainy night, the broken-down car, the quiet, kind mechanic who had offered her a lifeline. She realized then how one small, single act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that changed everything. When they said their vows, they didn't make promises of a perfect life, free of trouble. They promised something far more real, far more meaningful. They promised to choose each other every single day, no matter what storms came their way. And they did, because they had learned that sometimes, the greatest love stories don't start with a fairy tale. They begin with a breakdown on the side of the road and end with two hearts that simply refuse to give up on each other. Thanks for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.